So it's January 14th, 2025 with VIHE online. And we are reading from Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Canto 7, Chapter 7, text 45 to 55. Okay, so you remember that we ended the sections yesterday. The last two verses, 43 and 44, were about that the body doesn't belong to us. Who actually owns the body? And therefore, what is the meaning of all of our relationships and possessions for a body that doesn't belong to us and will eventually just become stool or earth or ashes. So this is kind of continuing the same theme here. Kim etar atmanas tuchai sada dehain nashvarai anartar artha sankasyar nityananda rasoda day. All this paraphernalia is very near and dear as long as the body exists. But as soon as the body is destroyed, all things related to the body are also finished. Therefore, actually, one has nothing to do with them. But because of ignorance, one accepts them as valuable. Compared to the ocean of eternal happiness, they are most insignificant. What is the use of such insignificant relationships for the eternal living being? Nirupyatam iha swarta kiyandeha brito suraha niseska vavastasu klishyamanasya karma bihi. My dear friends, O sons of the Asuras, the living entity receives different types of bodies according to his previous fruitive activities. Thus he is seen to suffer with reference to his particular body in all conditions of life, beginning with his infusion into the womb. Please tell me, therefore, after full consideration, what is the living entity's actual interest in fruitive activities which result in hardship and misery? Karman yarab hate dehi dehanatman uvartina karma bistan ute deham ubayam twa vivekataha. The living entity who has received his present body because of his past fruitive activity may end the results of his actions in this life, but that does not mean he is liberated from bondage to material bodies. The living entity receives one type of body, and by performing actions with that body, he creates another. Thus he transmigrates from one body to another through repeated birth and death because of his gross ignorance. Tasmad artat takamascha dharmascha yat apashrayaha bhajantan hayatmanam aniyam harim ishvaram. The four principles of advancement in spiritual life, dharma, artha, kama, and moksha, all depend on the disposition of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, my dear friends, follow in the footsteps of devotees. Without desire, fully depend upon the disposition of the Supreme Lord and worship him, the super soul, in devotional service. Sarvesham api bhutanam harir atmeshvara priyaha bhutair mahadibiswa kritai kritanam jivasam gnitaha. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Hari, is the soul and the super soul of all living entities. Every living entity is a manifestation of his energy in terms of the living soul and the material body. Therefore, the Lord is the most dear, and he is the supreme controller. Deho sura manusyo va, yaksho gandharva eva va, bhajan mukunda charanam, swatismam syad yata vayam. If a demigod, demon, human being, yaksha, gandharva, or anyone within this universe renders service to the lotus feet of Mukunda, who can deliver liberation, he is actually situated in the most auspicious condition of life, exactly like us, the Mahajanas headed by Prahlad Maharaj. Nalam dvijatam devatvam rishivam vasaratmajaha prinanaya mukundasya na vritam na bahugnata na danam na taponejya na socham na vritanicha priyate malaya bhaktya harir anyad vidam badam. My dear friends, O sons of the demons, You cannot please the Supreme Personality of Godhead by becoming perfect brahmanas, demigods, or great saints, or by becoming perfectly good in etiquette or vast learning. None of these qualifications can awaken the pleasure of the Lord, nor by charity, austerity, sacrifice, cleanliness, or vows can one satisfy the Lord. The Lord is pleased only if one has unflinching, unalloyed devotion to him. Without sincere devotional service, everything is simply a show. Tato harara bhagavati bhaktin kuru tadanavaha atmaopayena sarvatra sarvabhutatmanishware. My dear friends, O sons of the demons, in the same favorable way that one sees himself and takes care of himself, take to devotional service to satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is present everywhere as the super soul of all living entities. Daitya yaksha rakshamsi shriya shudra vajo kashaha kaga mrigaha papa jivaha santim yachutam gataha. Oh, my friends, O sons of demons, everyone, including you, the yakshas and rakshasas, the unintelligent women, shudras and cowherd men, the birds, the lower animals, and the sinful living entities, can revive his original eternal spiritual life and exist forever simply by accepting the principles of bhakti yoga. Etavan ekaloke smin pumsa swarta parasmritaha ekanta bhaktir govinde yat sarvatra tarikshanam. In this material world, to render service to the lotus feet of Govinda, the cause of all causes, and to see him everywhere, is the only goal of life. This much alone is the ultimate goal of human life, as explained by all the revealed scriptures. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the 7th canto, 7th chapter of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, entitled What Prahlada Learned in the Womb. So the summary of these verses is that seeing the Lord as the controller and our best friend, and seeing him everywhere and in everything, ourself, our body, and the supersoul, we become detached from the useless attempt to enjoy our body and the world separately from him. Instead, we serve him and do good for all living entities. And this state is available to anyone. Okay, so the basic questions we have here are: how do we practically live in the world if we are detached from our bodies and economic development? How can we understand how to feel and act toward the Lord? So the themes of this section are the uselessness of focusing on the body and bodily relations and possessions, that bhakti is available to anyone in any body, regardless of birth or even species. Right? Usually we say just for the humans, but this section is saying no, for everything, everybody. Love and service for Krishna is natural, and service for Krishna includes detached work in the world. So Prahlad Maharaj is basically repeating in different ways the same things that he's been saying. Okay, so our first section is verses 45 to 47, which is continuing from the last two verses that we read yesterday, that the struggle for material things is unworthy. The material body, its possessions, its relationships. So putting our time and energy into that, right? And I often talk about how in the early days of the movement, we used to do philosophical skits pretty much every Sunday feast. And we also used to sometimes do street theater, like we would take those skits, and when we'd go on Harinam, we would also do philosophical skits out on the street. And one of the ones that we did was called The Wrong Bank Account. And this is when I remember the first time I saw it, I didn't even understand it. Like, what was the point? Because they wouldn't explain these skits, they would just do them. So you may all know that you are able to put money into someone else's account if you know their routing number and their account number, and you know what bank, of course. So you can go into a bank or Yeah, and you can deposit money in someone else's account. You cannot take money out of someone else's account, but you can put money into someone else's account. And obviously, if you get one number wrong, you're putting it into a different account. So this play was about a person who wanted to be very responsible and save some money. So when he worked, he would put some money aside and put it into savings, and he would deposit it in the bank. Then after some time, he went to withdraw the money, and he found out that he had one number wrong, and he was putting the money into someone else's account. So the meaning of this metaphor is that if we're investing everything in our body, in those related to us through our body, and in the possessions that belong to this body, that we're going to end up with nothing, because none of those things are actually belonging to the self. I've read another metaphorical story of like a man who has 4 wives, and one wife represents, the body, and one represents the possessions, and one represents, I think, family, and the other represents the self. And how, his whole life he neglected the wife that represents the self, and that when he's dying, the other 3 desert him. His body, his possessions, and his relatives. Only the self is there, but he had never taken care of the self. So there's many metaphors for this type of behavior. I also often think about the story in this connection, the story of Kaliya, Krishna dancing on Kaliya. And before he's dancing on Kaliya, he's wrapped up in the coils of Kaliya, and it seems like he's going to die. And the residents of Vrindavan, when they see these inauspicious omens, they go to the Kaliya lake, and they all practically die, because they had invested everything. Prabhupada says they had invested everything in Krishna. Just like sometimes when people have a lot of money invested in the stock market, and their stocks go down, they commit suicide. We had that in the Great Depression in 1929, that, businessmen were jumping out of windows because everything they had invested in was gone. Yeah. And the devotee feels this way about Krishna. They invest everything in Krishna. So text 45 is, as soon as we die, we no longer have any connection to our relationships and possessions. One thing you'll note in a lot of near-death experiences is that when people leave their body, they don't even realize it's their body. It's not uncommon. Like a ghost is just the opposite. The ghost hasn't realized that they've died, and they hang around. But many people, if they have their heart stops, their brain stops, whatever, and they leave their body temporarily, they'll often report, once they're returned to their body, that, they're seeing, oh, there was some car accident, and this person looks like they're really in bad shape, and they're not realizing, or they'll leave their body in the operating room, and they'll say, wow, that guy on the table, he doesn't look very good. And they don't realize that they're looking at their own body. That fast, they're in their body, they're identifying with their body, and they're driving along, and then boom, there's an accident. They're out of their body. They're looking at their body lying on the road, broken bones and bleeding and so forth. And they're like, oh, that poor lady there. Wow, somebody should help her. And there can be that kind of immediate lack of identification with the body. It's pretty amazing, actually. It's pretty amazing. What to speak of those who are connected with the body? We have the story in the Bhagavatam, Maharaj Chitraketu, how when his son dies, he really wanted a son. And please don't think this was just some attachment to having children and having family. It's the duty of any leader to provide for succession. It's one of the prime duties of anyone in a leadership position, and especially a king. And so in former times, the succession was usually biological. You had to have a child, preferably a male child. I mean, we had Ganga Mata Goswamini became the queen because her parents rather only had the one child, or just a daughter. But generally, male child who you train up from birth to become the leader. And Chitraketu couldn't have any children, and he kept marrying and marrying and marrying. In those days, such things were allowed. You could have more than one wife. So he kept marrying many, many wives, and it just didn't matter. He couldn't have any children. And then finally, he gets a kid, and then, the kid's dead. Like at 2 years old, the kid's dead. So he's just completely lamenting, and the Narada and Angira come, and they say, we can bring the soul back into the body. So the soul comes back into the body, and he looks around, and Narada says, just see, your mother and father are crying for you. And he says, who's my mother and father here in this group? Who are they? He said, I've had so many lifetimes. And in so many lifetimes, I've had so many mothers and fathers. Who are my mothers and fathers in this body? So yet while we're in the body, therefore, Maya is compared to a dream. While we're in a dream, what's happening in the dream is very important. And as soon as we wake up, often we don't even remember it. Often we wake up and we're like aware I was dreaming. But sometimes we can't remember the dream after a few seconds. Like, what was I dreaming about? And even if you can remember the dream, it's like it doesn't mean anything. So Prahlad Maharaj says, why are we choosing this kind of happiness over eternal happiness? And there's the word Nityananda Raso Dade. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says this means for the devotees who experience the ocean of eternal bliss from worshiping the Lord. In text 48, this idea of hardships, and there are serious hardships in gaining sexual pleasure, and none is our real interest. So this is true not only among humans, but among animals. So among many, many animal species, the males have to convince the female to mate with them. They may have to fight other males and become injured. And after all that, the female may reject them. And then, of course, one has the responsibility to take care of the young. And even in the animal kingdom, the parents will sometimes sacrifice their life to protect their children. So much trouble just to enjoy sexual pleasure. And of course, like the birds, they make a nest. In human society, we make a home, right? We get this hard knot, Hridaya Grantha. We make a home and land and food and so many things, and our children's education. And none of that has anything to do with us. We're talking about death, but even before death, when my mother, the last year of her life, she was in a nursing home by her choice. I volunteered to stay with her and take care of her. And she said, I don't want to be a burden to my children. And she insisted on going into a nursing home. Anyway, she was mentally sharp until the moment she died. But many of the other residents in the home had some form of dementia. And many of them had forgotten their families. I remember going this one woman, or they'd forgotten their jobs. Like one of them was some world famous chef, and he couldn't even remember that he had that job. And I remember going this one woman, and I said, are you married? And she's like, yes, no, I don't remember. And I'm like, do you have any children? And she said, I have 2 children. No, I have 3 children. I don't know. I don't remember. It was so freaky that these people they couldn't remember. They couldn't even remember if they had children or they had a spouse or what work they did. So it's just such a fleeting thing. And text 49, the point is that this is going to keep going on life after life. According to our karma, it's really depressing. If we think, well, okay, I'm going to finish off all this karma in this life, we're going to get more karma in this life or another life. This illusion just keeps perpetuating. And so Prabhupada focuses on his purport on differentiating our life from that of the animals. Of course, later in this chapter, Prahlad says even animals can take to Krishna consciousness. But Prabhupada generally makes this differentiation. The class I was hearing this morning, Prabhupada was making this differentiation. Don't be like cats and dogs. He would usually say cats and dogs because when Prabhupada left India and came to America, he saw so many people having dogs and cats as pets. So, of course, the Shastric statements are usually like hogs and asses and cows because the people in that culture were seeing them. So we don't usually see those kind of animals unless you're out in a farm. So Prabhupada would say cats and dogs. So don't be like an animal. And he said, take shelter of a guru and find out what is the purpose of life. Right? We're going to so many authorities. We have our teachers in school, our parents, and there's so many books and courses from so many authorities about how to be happy. But we should find from a real guru, somebody needs to mute. We should find from a real guru the purpose of life. Okay, next section of verses are 48 through 52. That if we depend on the Supreme Lord and we please him by service, that will be most auspicious. So in text 48, it says, ultimately, our material situation is not just karma, but also the will of Krishna. Now, this is a point I make when I teach about Varna, I teach about career dharma and what is our nature. And people will ask, where does our nature come from? Is it from previous lives? Is it from our upbringing in this life? And my answer is always that question is not answerable by a conditioned living entity. Then I'm sure Krishna knows the answer. But no one's been able to figure out exactly how much is nature and how much is nurture in our disposition, in our temperament, in what we probably would call our psychophysical nature. Obviously, a huge portion of it is nature. A huge portion of it is what we're bringing in from previous lives, from our desires, from our activities, and so forth. But we're also influenced by our time in our mother's womb, by the time of conception, by the pregnancy, by the situation of birth. Ayurveda delineates those three: the moment of conception, the situation during our mother's pregnancy with us, and the type of birth that we had, what happened during our birth, as having a huge effect on our personality. But there's also the will of God, just like the 5 factors of action that Krishna gives in the 18th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And there is also the will of God. And what I tell especially devotees is that I said, if you're taking up devotional service in this life, then most likely, according to Srila Rupa Goswami, you had some connection with devotional service in another life. And pretty much, generally, if someone's seriously taking up some system of religion and surrender to the Lord, really seriously, then it's not usually their first life. That seriousness generally accrues over several lifetimes. And if somebody is in the service of the Lord, then the Lord also is going to have some particular mission for them, for which they need certain talents and certain proclivities. Just like the Lord arranged, that Arjuna got the weapons that he needed. Arjuna also had to have the disposition of a Kshatriya in that lifetime. When he's Nara, he doesn't. He has the disposition of Brahmana. So our disposition is also the will of the Lord. And therefore, very important in text 48, that we do our duties in this life with full dependence on the Lord for the results and without material desires. Because one might think that, well, since this body doesn't belong to me and it's temporary and all of my relatives and possessions have nothing to do with me, and in the larger scheme of life, my attachment to them is meaningless, that I should just live without family and without possessions. That is an option. It's not that that isn't an option, but actually one can also see, like Krishna says, those who are self-realized, they have no duties to perform. But one can also see that I have this particular body, I have this particular psychology, I have this particular family members, I have these particular possessions, I have this particular residence in this particular place at this particular time, not only due to my own desires, but to the will of the Lord. And if I'm going to think it's my own desires, then I need to purify those desires by engaging them in service. And if I think it's the will of the Lord, then I should use my facility to serve the Lord. And this is a practical means of taking shelter of the Lord. I dedicate everything to Him. I depend on Him for the result. And I don't have selfish desires in doing those things. Okay, 49, the Lord controls our destiny, kind of a repeat of the same concept, and is the most dear. Ishwara, we have Ishwara, the supreme controller, and Priya, the dear one. Prahlad Maharaj has said this before, I don't remember the verse number, but he has said this previously. And because here he is these things, he's the controller and he's the most dear because he's the super soul. Our body is his energy, and we, the soul, are also part of him. So I'm part of him. He's the soul of my soul, the super soul. And this body is also him. And verse 50, Prahlad gives himself as an example to his friends that anyone can be all auspicious if they serve the Lord. He's like, look at me. I'm serving the Lord, and everything for me is auspicious. All right, 51 to 52 is a very strange verse. There's a similar verse in the end of the 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And Prahlad lists things that, if done without devotion, don't please the Lord. And Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur says, far from pleasing him, they're a cause of ridicule, vidambanan. Okay, let's take a look at those things, right? In verse 51. It's quite, again, there's a very, very similar list in the end of the 11th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. And by becoming perfect brahmanas, let's all look at the Sanskrit too. Dvijatvam. So Dvija is having the nature of a second-born person, which could mean Brahman, Kshatriya, or Vaishya. Devatvam, Tvam is like ness, N-E-S-S, being a demigod. Rishi Tvam, being a saintly person. Okay, for pleasing Mukundasya, for pleasing Mukunda. Vritam, good conduct. Vritti is the rules. Bahu Gnata, vast learning. So Gnata means to know. Bahu, many. You know many things. Dhanam, giving a lot of charity. Tapasya, austerity. Ijja, worship. Socham, cleanliness. Vratani, vows. They don't please him. Amala Bhaktya, he's going to be pleased by pure, spotless devotion. And these other things are of vidambanam, are only a show. Now, Hiranyakashipu took a great vow, and he did a lot of austerity. He also had vast learning. I don't know if he gave in charity, and I don't know if he did any worship. Not sure about his cleanliness behavior. But he did all of these things. He was a great yogi without any devotion to the Lord. He appeared to have devotion to Brahma, and that was just to get something from Lord Brahma. Okay, let's look at what this, because we do all this in bhakti, yes? We take a second birth, we take initiation, We try to act like a deva and a saintly person. We have good conduct. That's the idea of the 4 regulative principles. We should have good conduct, and the 10 items mentioned by Bhishma Dev in the first canto. We try to learn. That's what we're doing sitting in this class today. We give in charity. Actually, Krishna says everyone, even the great souls, should be giving in charity. No one should be a miser. We give the holy, at least we give prasadam in charity. We give the holy name in charity. We definitely do austerities. We do fast days. We get up early in the morning. The regular principles may be a lot of austerity in Kali Yuga. Ija, we do worship of the Lord. We should be clean. Right? We wash our clothes every day. We take a bath every day, maybe 2-3 times a day even. Doing vows. So we've taken vows 16 rounds, take vows 3 Gayatri. We take vows for the regulative principles. We may take other short-term vows also. So we do all of these things in bhakti. Now, if they're not going to satisfy the Lord, and if they're just embarrassing, that may be kind of depressing. They're just a cause of ridicule. And again, if we turn to the 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna says a similar kind of thing, and then Prabhupada talks about how we actually do all of those in service. Okay, let's find this, because it's also quite interesting. Right, where Krishna says in 1154, my dear Arjuna, only by undivided devotional service can I be understood, as I am standing before you and can thus be seen directly. Only in this way can you enter into the mysteries of my understanding. Bhakti Twanamaya Sakya Ahamit Eva Vidorjanur Gnatum Drastum Chachatvena Pravestum Taparantapa. And in the previous verse, 53, he said, you cannot see this form by studying the Vedas, by undergoing serious penances, nor by charity, nor by worship. So it's not as long of a list as what Prahlad Maharaj gives, but a similar concept. So let's look at what this means. And I give this metaphor frequently because I think it's just so easy to understand. So let's say you have a married couple, husband and wife, and the man is, it could be the woman, but I'll just pick the man. The man is unfaithful, and maybe he's like really unfaithful, like severely, like someone like, what was his name? Tiger Woods, who had so many affairs. Let's say the man had like 50 affairs. And the wife finds out and she throws him out of the house. So then he thinks about it and he decides, actually, I really like my wife and I really messed up. And, I'd like her to take me back. He has a change of heart. Okay, so he comes to the door of his house and he knocks on the door. My dear wife, I am sorry. I come back to you. I want to be with you. Now, let's say that she actually loves him and wants him to come back. Now, some women might not. Some women would say, what, good riddance to bad garbage and just get a divorce. But let's say that she's not like that. She actually loves him and she really wants him back and she wants to forgive him. However, she's not going to just immediately trust him, and she probably won't let him into the house. He'll probably have to stand outside. She may open the door and talk to him, but then she'll say, look, you have to show me that you've changed. And he might say, well, how could I do that? What kind of things could I do to demonstrate to you that I've actually changed? And she might even give him a list. She might say, if you do these things on that list, this will show me that you've changed. All right. So then he goes and he tries to do the things on the list. So let's say that he does the things on the list, and then he comes back to see her, and he says, here you go. I've done everything on the list. Now let me back into the house. That will not work. It just won't work. That very attitude, I've done everything on the list, now you're obligated to let me back in, is the antithesis of the purpose of whatever was on that list. So if we decide that we want to know the Lord gives us ways in which we can show our sincerity to know him. We have been having, metaphorically speaking, love affairs with illusion in so many lifetimes, in so many forms, a lot more than 50 probably. And then we're coming to the Lord and we're saying, I want to restore my relationship with you. And fortunately for us, the Lord wants that as well. He's not of the mood of, well, you blew it, and so now you're in eternal hellfire and no chance of a reconciliation. Thankfully, he's not of that mood. And he gives us a list in the scriptures, through the guru, through the saintly persons. These are the things that you should do. And we can think about, the list of 64 items of bhakti that's given by Srila Rupa Goswami. We can think about the list of the 9 items of devotion. A lot of what Prahlad Maharaj is talking about, be kind to all living entities and worship the Lord and meditate on the Lord and so forth. Charity would be part of kindness to living entities and compassion for living entities. But if we think, well, I've done all of these, now the Lord must be pleased with me, he's obligated to be pleased with me, then it becomes a cause of ridicule. It's a joke. If you think about this errant husband, if he, brings some flowers and some diamond jewelry, and he says to his wife, now you have to let me back in. And she's like, I'm not a prostitute. You can't just buy me. So we can't buy Krishna. We can't bribe him. We can't. It's not like that. It's just not like that. We may think that way. And I know I have. I remember this was maybe 49 years ago when I was in the Boston Temple, and I was quite ill most of the time I was there. I think it was because I was malnourished. The temple was poor, and the prasadam didn't have a full scope of nutrition. I mean, basically, we were eating like rice and potatoes. We didn't even have chapatis. We didn't even have dal. And also we had a lot of cockroaches in that building, and I was given the service of spraying pesticides under the altar in a very enclosed place without any kind of protective gear. So between the pesticides and the poor nutrition, I was quite ill. And I was really quite sick a lot of the time. And I was, I don't know, too young and ignorant to think that it had anything to do with the pesticides in the diet. That's another discussion. So I remember, praying to the deities and just saying, look, I'm doing everything you asked. I'm following the 4 relative principles. I'm chanting 16 rounds. I'm chanting 3 Gayatris. I'm going to the morning program. I'm only eating prasadam. I'm just reading the Shastra every day. I was doing service for the deities regularly. And I was listing all these things. I'm doing all these things. I'm not supposed to be sick. Or even, I'm supposed to be self-realized already. Like, why am I still in materialistic consciousness after all these things I'm doing? Why haven't you shown yourself to me? I remember meeting a man like this in a temple in Australia. I can't remember which temple. I remember what it looked like, but I don't remember which temple it was. Maybe it was the old Brisbane temple. And this one really, how would you say? This guy, he was in really bad shape. I mean, he was a mess. And he came to the temple and he talked to me and he said, I followed everything for 10 years and I still didn't become self-realized, so it's all rubbish. But that very mentality is the problem. So we do all of these things in service, but the idea is we do them with love and we do them with humility. We don't do them as a way of trying to force Krishna, or as like some kind of a bargaining thing, that I've done all these things. Okay, next group of verses is 53 to 55. And looking at all these things, everyone should take to Krishna Bhakti the ultimate goal of life. 53 is an interesting verse. We should serve the Lord with as much love as we have for ourselves. This verse implies that we see ourselves favorably and care for ourselves. I have met devotees who are super critical of everyone, and they justify that by saying, well, I'm also super critical of myself. And they think that, the verses from our acharyas that appear to be very self-critical are a guide for them, but they hate themselves. This is a symptom of the demons, as given in the 16th chapter, envious of their own self. So we should love the Lord as much as we love ourselves. We should serve the Lord like I serve myself. I bathe my body, I dress my body. I should bathe the Lord and dress the Lord. Maybe I ornament my body. I want to look nice. I should want the Lord to look nice. I want to feed myself tasty, nutritious food. I should want to please the Lord with tasty, nutritious food. I want people to think well of me. I want people to say nice things about me. I should say nice things about the Lord, like that. In this purport, Prabhupada focuses on preaching, and he particularly says to the Indians, if you're an Indian, get out there and preach. Srila Prabhupada was so frustrated that when he was in India, that the other Indians were not interested in Krishna consciousness, that they weren't preaching outside of India. He had to bring white people and Africans, into India to get the Indians to wake up. So to take care of not only the Lord, but to take care of all living entities, to love all living entities as much as we love ourselves. And text 54, anyone can serve Achyuta, the Lord who never falls, and thus we can attain perfection and ourselves never fall. And there's anyone, no bar, even for animals, even for demons. The Christians tend to think that angels and demons, they tend to think that we are this body. And so they think there are certain beings called angels and certain beings called demons, and that's it. But no, the demons can also, of course, they do say that Lucifer is a fallen angel. But anyway, we say that the demons can, even the demons can worship Krishna. And 55, we should serve Govinda and see him everywhere. Just as a greedy person sees everywhere an opportunity to make money, and a lusty person sees everywhere an opportunity for sex. So in the same way, we everywhere, where is Krishna? Where is Krishna? Where is Krishna? Before we start anything, my dear Lord, this is for you. While we're doing anything, my dear Lord, this is for you. When we're finished with everything, my dear Lord, this is for you. To see him again, I was hearing Prabhupada say this morning, it says it all the time. Find Krishna, right, in the taste of water. The light of the sun, our ability. So some interesting points here, that this detachment doesn't mean we stop acting, but we act in service depending on the Lord and without material desires. And what keeps happening over and over again in these instructions by Prahlad Maharaj, that serving the Lord includes doing good for all living beings. All right, as usual, I'm going to ask all of you to take a break. That means physically stand up and move your body around and take your eyes away from a screen. So stop looking at your screens and get up and move. We'll come back at the top of the hour or the bottom of the hour, depending on what what part of the world you're in. It looks like we are recording. Yeah. Okay, Hare Krishna. I'd first like to ask you, I'm going to have another comparison. We did this before with an earlier text, but I'd like you to compare text 49 to 529. So 529 in the Bhagavad Gita is again Bhoktaram Yakatapasam Sarvaloka Maheshwaram Suridam Sarvabhutanam Gyatramam Shantim Richati. And 49. Okay, so that is 49. So anybody like to compare Bhagavad Gita 529 to text 49 here?
Hare Krishna.
Yes, Hare Krishna.
He's in 529. He says that's Bhuta Lok Maheshwara, right? Loka Maheshwara.
Yes.
And he says that his manifestation of his energy is the supreme controller. So it's the same. He says Ishvara. And again he says in this verse, most dear to all.
Yes.
In 529 he says Surudam Sarva Bhutanam. He's a well-wisher of all.
Yes, well-wisher of everyone. Yes. And we have also, right, Ishvara, Ateshmara, Ateshwara. So we have the Ishvara bit and we have the Suridam bit. Do we have the Bhoktaram?
No, here there is no Bhoktaram.
No Bhoktaram.
No.
No. Now we have this, the Ishwaram and the Suridam. Sham Kishore Prabhu, yes.
Yeah, Hare Krishna Mataji. So I think the key difference I see is like if you look at cause and effect. So the cause seems to be pretty similar between this and 5.29. But in 5.29, the effect is Gyatva Mam Shantim Rakshati. So that is not here, though the effect here, if it can be called, is therefore the Lord is most dear and he is the supreme controller. So when I look at the two verses, I say they are pretty similar, but similar in cause, but in the effect, they're giving two different kind of.
What would you
Though
say
it is
what would you say the effect that's being given here is?
Here, the more effect is more about like the Lord is dear and supreme controller. So that seems to be the more effect. Whereas 5.29, the final effect is Gyatva Mam Shanti Mrichati. So that's like the peace formula. So that's the effect there is written more towards the perspective of a person. But here the effect is more from the perspective of the Lord, that the Lord is controller and dear, something like that.
Okay, excellent. Right. We had a question that Ekanta listed, and I wondered if any of you have any thoughts about that before I ask you something else. She said, why does Prahlad keep calling his classmates, oh, sons of the demons? He doesn't say, you know, my friends, my classmates. He just says, oh, demon sons. Any thoughts? I don't know the answer to that question. Hadn't thought about it before and haven't read anything about it. So, I mean, I have some guesses.
We may think it's derogatory, but maybe they don't think it's derogatory.
I did think of that maybe to them, that's a term of respect. Because in order to go into the school with Prahlad, these must not have been just street boys, you know. Most likely, because this school was situated right next to the palace, as described earlier, and the teachers are the sons of Sukracharya, they're not just some ordinary teachers. One would assume that within the kingdom there were lots of schools and lots of teachers, but that they would have been royalty children. That's a reasonable.
It's like Mother. It's like Prahlad saying to his father, "Best of the demons." I'm not sure he was being facetious.
Yeah. Okay. Pulastamuni Prabhu, your thought? Yeah, you can't hear you very well. Somehow your sound is messed up. I don't know what's wrong with your sound. Yeah, we can't understand you. Is everyone having the same problem or is it just me? Yeah, okay, your sound is messed up. Sorry, Prabhu. Maybe just have to write in the chat for today and figure out what that is. Okay, you could say that he's referring how inclusive bhakti is. That's possible because he makes this point over and over again. Where Nardarishi, you said he does call them my friends. Can you find that in the Sanskrit? And where it says that. And someone said also to help them be humble. So it's funny. Who said that? Someone said to help them be humble. So maybe to help them be humble, but I don't think so, because again, that would actually help them be proud. They were probably proud of it. Does not mean their nature is demoniac. Yes, that's a good point. Like Brahma Bandhu, the friend of a Brahmana. So you might be saying you're the children of the demons, but that doesn't mean that you have to be a demon. That's also a possibility. Mahalakshmi, yes?
I am in the previous thing, so maybe you're not interested. The comparison of the two verses.
Oh, yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So in Bhagavad Gita says that is describing, as the devotee was saying before, not that those who know him and as beneficiaries, the ultimate beneficiary of sacrifices and so attains peace. So this is the same as that one.
Okay. Did you have anything more specific?
Because the Lord is the supreme soul of all living entities. That's why he is the supreme controller. Is saying that because he is the supreme soul, the super soul of all living entities, he is the supreme controller. And it's the same as saying if one knows that Krishna is the beneficiary of everything, attains peace. This means that he knows he is the controller, so I am in his hands, and both say the same thing in different ways.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, and thank you, Nardarishi, for looking that up. So we have that Prabhupada does that with his translations. He puts things, he'll have things in the word for word that he doesn't put into the translations, and there are things in the translations that are not in the Sanskrit. He'll pull in, he'll talk about in purport sometimes. He'll say this term is very important, but that's not in the translation. It's just in the word. It's quite frequent. I'm not sure what the frequency is, but it's quite frequent. And I could say something else about it, but it would be a little politically charged. So I'm just going to go ahead and say it. You know, with the posthumous editing that was done on Prabhupada's books, some of the stated purposes of the posthumous editing was to create consistency between the word for word, the translation, and the purport in this regard. And when I did a deep dive into the posthumous editing, you know, one of my conclusions was that if you really wanted to have consistency between the Sanskrit word for word translation and purport, you would have to make sweeping changes throughout Srila Prabhupada's books. And clearly, such a consideration was clearly not important to Srila Prabhupada, just very clearly. It wasn't something that he thought should be done. And so people trying to do it was definitely not something that he was interested in. So that's end of that little political announcement. All right. I have this question. So from the purport to 48, Prabhupada says, to take shelter of the lotus feet of Krishna means to act according to the rules and regulations of Bhagavad Dharma devotional service. As far as economic development is concerned, we should discharge our occupational duties but fully depend on the lotus feet of the Lord for they result. So this is a summary. If you want to summarize, if you wanted to like have an encapsulated summary, how to live as a devotee. So these two sentences would do that. And I'd just like to know your thoughts on this statement from Srila Prabhupada.
Could you please repeat the question? I couldn't.
It's in the chat.
Sorry.
I got so many requests from various people to repeat questions. I decided that if they were not extremely simple, I was going to put them in the chat. So it's not really a question. It's really a question of discussion. I would just like to hear people's thoughts about these two sentences. What does this mean? What does this mean practically? What does this mean in our lives? What does this mean for our preaching? Okay, Kulastamuni, yes. Similar to Bhagavad Gita 247. Okay. Let's look at Bhagavad Gita 247. No, 245, but I don't know 247. Ah, the very famous one. So, yes. 247, that's 247. Okay, Krishna's will and not our effort alone determines our failure and success. We work as if everything depends on us and pray because everything depends on Krishna. Okay, nice, Sitarani. Okay, some other thoughts you can read. Shri Govinda, yes.
I frankly have more questions than answers as such. For
Okay,
instance, the example that you brought up about 49 years ago, you were trying to do everything, like, I mean, you were doing all your, I mean, presumably you were discharging all your occupational duties, you were fully dependent on lotus feet of Krishna, you were completely following the rules and regulations of Bhagavad Dharma. So my question, then it raises a lot of questions. What does it mean? What does it mean, occupational duties? Who determines it? And when we are under some authorities, how do we determine? So yeah, I have more questions than comments.
Okay. Well, I would say I wasn't fully doing my occupational duties, that I was certainly just following my authorities. I mean, I was living in the Boston Temple. I mean, it wasn't even just the pesticides and the food, but the only place they gave me to live was literally a closet. It was actually a closet, which means it had no windows. And it was it was on the top floor, so it was right under the attic and the roof. And there was I think there was already a panel to enter the attic from that room. I don't think my husband had to cut a hole in the ceiling, although I don't remember that, whether he did or not. But he put an exhaust fan, opened that up, put an exhaust fan so that it would at least pull air from under the door. There was only this much space under the door. So it would at least pull air from under the door and give me some kind of air circulation. And I had no natural light in that room. So I had no natural light in that room. I had no air circulation. I lived there for 10 months. So in one sense, I was just following my authority. That's the facility that my husband gave me. I mean, he didn't have any better facility. He was living in a smaller closet in the Brahmachari ashram. So, Hare Krishna. And I was following our temple president, who ended up being a horrific pedophile, but we didn't know that till many, 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 many years later. We didn't know that probably till 20 or 30 years later. But I wasn't taking care of myself. Like Prahlad Maharaj says, just like we love ourselves, we should love the Lord. And I didn't have any consciousness of that at that time. In one sense, you could say that none of my authorities talked about that. It was, part of it was definitely the responsibility of my authorities, but part of it was also my responsibility. That I also needed to say, hey, you know, I need air and light, and I need something besides rice and potatoes. I mean, at the Sunday feast, we got gulab jamins, but I don't think that counts for, we got gulab jamins and we got blueberry halva on the Sunday feast. And again, potatoes. Yeah. We didn't even have much, they had the same thing every Sunday feast. We didn't even have much dairy. You know, we didn't even have like much milk or anything like that. So I wasn't actually taking care of myself. And I mean, I see, there were many other crazy things about that time in Boston. I could go on for a couple hours about how crazy that was. But I got a lot of lessons from that 10 months about what not to do.
Mm.
And what Krishna consciousness is not, and how not to take care of people. And I learned the song Paramakarna because we used to sing it every Saturday. I got to fall in love with that song. And I got, I mean, I did a little Didi service in the Radha Govinda in New York, but I really did a lot of Didi service in Boston. So I got a lot of times with the Didis. But mostly I learned what not to do. And learning what not to do is also valuable. You know, I'd say learning what not to do is as valuable as learning what to do.
Mm.
And that time there had a very significant impact on my whole life in terms of myself as a teacher, myself as a preacher, and myself as a practitioner of bhakti. Again, mostly on what not to do. I mean, the way the women were treated there, you can understand if the temple president was a pervert, was really bad. And yeah, I also learned a lot about that kind of thing. So I see that Krishna was there and he was working with me. My occupational duty, I was not engaged properly at all. But I wasn't engaged properly at all in Krishna consciousness for the first 10 years in the Hare Krishna movement. So that's another point. But I also learned from that. You know, I learned a lot about how important it is to engage people according to their nature. And a lot of what drives me today is, again, you know, just like with Srila Prabhupada, where a lot of his preaching is from what he saw being done wrong. It's not all from what he saw being done right. What he saw politicians did wrong, what he saw, you know, religious leaders did wrong, what he saw going wrong in his spiritual masters organization. So that informed a lot of his, Prahlad Maharaj's teaching is also informed a lot, not just by Narada speaking theoretically, but what he was actually seeing practically. Like he said to Shanda and Amarka, he said, you know, I was told that there was this friends and enemies mentality, but now I'm actually seeing it. Yes,
Yeah.
Advaita Krishna.
Sorry, can I just
Yeah, it's well,
Okay.
it's consequence of the time. It's like you're saying you should have said something, but I felt like we couldn't have said anything. It was just the way things were, and it was difficult to say, and it was also difficult to voice up. So we just had to live the best we can.
That's also
I felt.
true. I didn't even have an awareness that it was wrong. So that's a little different from having an awareness that it's wrong and feeling constrained to speak up, and not even having an awareness that it was wrong. Not even having an awareness that I should be aware of such things.
Mm.
So I didn't even know that I should be paying attention to things like that. Now, part of that lack of awareness was due to my general upbringing in a society that was touting science and technology as the saviors of the world. So I grew up in an environment where the concept of fresh air and sunshine and healthy food was not part of my environment growing up at all. You know, not at all. I mean, I grew up in an environment where, you know, refrigeration, antibiotics, vaccines, pesticides, artificial fertilizers, going to the moon was going to save the world. And there were advertisements, better living through chemistry. The concept that being in a small enclosed space twice a week, spraying heavy-duty pesticides would be bad for your health was not something that was in the general understanding in the world at that time. The idea was that pesticides were wonderful things and so forth. And the idea of healthy food, it wasn't there. The idea, and those days was that the more you processed food and the more divorced you had it from nature, the more you involved science, the more you were progressing. So, it was a couple years after that time in Boston that I started becoming aware of like alternate healing and alternate therapy. And it just wasn't even there in my knowledge or awareness. Sri Radha Govinda, yes.
Yeah, I appreciated your point from the leadership perspective, what Prahlad did or how Prabhupada thought. But I'm wondering, maybe not in detail with what you went through, but in principle, there are still certain challenges that devotees go through while we are trying to practice this principle that you put in the chat and you started the discussion. So I'm like expecting a principle or two when we are in situations where we might be or not be completely aware that something that's happening with us is healthy or unhealthy on an emotional or psychological level. But there's also the other side, that there's a polarity to be managed. On the other side, there's this principle of surrendering to Bhagavad Dharma and practicing in certain ways and following the authority. So what principle could I apply? I'm just asking even personally. When I find myself in this polarity of my basic needs as a woman, as a woman, I would just put it that way. And then the spiritual principles of a bhakti yogi, of a preacher who needs to go through certain austerities. Where do I draw the line? From your experience.
Okay, well, you're speaking in very vague terms, which I'm assuming is intentional. What do we do? What I'm hearing from you, and let me know if I'm not hearing it properly, but what do we do when apparently surrendering to Bhagavad Dharma and to what the Shastra is telling us, or our authorities are telling us is our prescribed duties, is at variance with some physiological, psychological, social needs? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Added to that, if there are polarities between the instruction of the following the husband and following the society as well.
Okay, so there may be different things coming from different authorities also. So, your parents or your husband may be saying one thing, your Shiksha gurus may be saying another thing, your Diksha guru may be saying another thing, the Tamil president is saying another thing, your GBC is saying another thing, your, political leaders in the country that you're in are saying something else. So there can be conflicts between authorities. And, what do we do in that kind of situation? So what do we do when we have these sort of conflicts? I'm thinking about in 930, where Prabhupada says that usually they're in parallel, that usually are what we need to do in this world for our basic living and sanity and upkeep and health are usually in parallel with our service to the Lord, but sometimes they come into opposition with one another. There definitely are times when it appears to come into opposition, where in order to do my duty as a mother or a wife or a husband or a child or whatever, Arjuna in one sense had this on the battlefield, that he felt following Krishna's orders put him at odds with his desired relationship with Bhisma and Drona, and even with Duryodhana, and he didn't want to kill family members, even Duryodhana. He definitely didn't want to do that. Like he didn't want to cause grief to Gandhari, just like Draupadi didn't want to cause grief to Dronacharya's wife, could be. So sometimes these things are in conflict, and then what do we do? So definitely our highest principle should be that we do what is pleasing to the Lord. At the same time, we want to run a marathon, not a sprint. So I need to do what's pleasing to the Lord in the way that I'm going to be able to keep doing devotional service for my life. I mean, recently on my last traveling and preaching trip, one of the authorities asked me, "Can you do such and such and such tomorrow?" And I said, "Sure, but then I'll be useless the rest of the time that I'm here." You know, I need to pace myself with what I can do. And it's exactly like that. You know, I shouldn't be acting outside of Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. At the same time, I need to honestly introspect that where am I in my life according to my age, according to my gender, according to my marital status, according to my psychology, according to my inclinations, that are going to assert themselves. They are just simply going to assert themselves. They're not repressible over the long haul. They're just not. And, you know, therefore, what is best for me right now? And without being hopefully obnoxious and yes, they will assert themselves, Maharaj. Without being obnoxious and disruptive as far as possible, I also need to be introspective, and ultimately, I have to fly my own plane. I was at a wedding recently in South Africa, and it was the bride's brother, I don't know, some close relative of the couple was a airline pilot. Oh, it was the brother-in-law of the groom, and he had gotten his own pilot's license, and he flew a private plane. And he said, "Well, Prabhupada says everyone should fly their own plane." I said, that doesn't literally mean everybody should get a pilot's license and fly their own plane. Talk about bad hermeneutics. But the point is that ultimately I am responsible for me, and I'm not a victim. And I can't go to the Lord and say, "Well, I messed up, but it wasn't my fault because it was my husband, it was my this, it was my that." You know, ultimately, I'm responsible. So somehow, you know, without causing a huge disruption, generally, I mean, I have caused a few huge disruptions, but without generally causing a big disruption, we have to make sure that my ability to advance in Krishna consciousness now and in the long haul is being taken care of. What do I need right now? And maybe what I need right now is not what I needed, you know, a year ago, and may not be what I need a year from now. That's going to shift. And it can be the opposite. What will facilitate my bhakti when I'm 20 may harm my bhakti when I'm 60. You know, it's like that. And we're not the supreme controller. And so whether or not we have facility for things is also not completely under our control. So that's also the case. We try our best, and then we have to leave it up to Krishna, that ultimately he knows what's best more than I know what's best. I might think this is what's best for me now in my bhakti, and Krishna will say, "Well, no, actually it's not." And so he may give me a very different situation. So that's also there. And what I many years ago, I can't remember how many years ago, but it was a very long time ago, I remember Jadharani asking me, She said, how do you know when some obstacle means that you should stop going in that direction, that you should, change your direction, change your plan, or when the obstacle is some kind of test that you're supposed to break through in order to keep going in the same direction? And my answer to her was, first of all, do you have the ability to break through the obstacle? Just like Prahlad Maharaj did not have the ability to stop his father from trying to abuse him. He didn't have that ability. There was no emergency number to call, whatever that is in your country. Here it's 911. He didn't have a 911 number to call. His father was running the Universal Police Force. It wouldn't have done him any good. If he had called the number, he just would have got one of his father's henchmen. And, ISKCON hadn't started a CPO then, so he couldn't call the CPO. I mean, what was he going to do? Like, he didn't have any way to go through that obstacle. He just had to just meditate on Krishna because he couldn't change the situation. So that's the first thing. Can I change the situation? Do I have it even in my power to change the situation? Then the next question is, if I have it in my power to change the situation, what will be the cost? Will changing it damage me spiritually? Will I have to become arrogant and offensive? And I see devotees do this. They try to fix things through arrogance and offensiveness. Is there a damage morally or ethically? Is there some damage legally? What's the price going to be? So I can do this, but will I make some spiritual, moral, ethical, legal damage to myself or others? I mean, I've seen devotees, their restaurants were failing, so they started serving wine and hiring a meat-eating cook. Because I've got to make it successful no matter what, instead of saying, okay, this Krishna's not sanctioning this, and I need to do something else. I mean, we think of Prabhupada in Jhansi, when there was an obstacle there, he just left Jhansi, he did not fight it. When there was an obstacle in Juhu, he fought it. So, can I fight it? And if so, what will be the result? Though this is also a question to ask. Yes, Mahalakshmi.
There is something that has called my attention. This is in verse 54, because many times or often.
Okay, but are you talking about the discussion that I asked to have, or this is a completely different topic?
Different.
Okay, not now. I don't know if we'll have time for it or not. Put it to the side, and if we have time for it, we'll get to it. Any other thoughts on what I posted about 48? So this is another difficult question. So here we're looking at 51, 52. So where Prahlad Maharaj lists all these things that won't please the Lord, vrats and worship and charity and all these things. So why do we do them? We do everything in that list. Why are we doing them? Thoughts? Well, I think you're kind of missing the point, Prasanna Prabhu, because these are things that Prahlad Maharaj says, these are not going to please the Lord. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says it's like laughable to think that these will please the Lord. But we do all of them in our devotional service. Why are we doing them if they won't please the Lord? That's my question. So maybe my question wasn't clear.
We are doing this as an offering to the Lord. We're doing them to please, as a service to the Lord. Like we are giving charity for the pleasure of the Vaishnavas.
He just said they won't please him.
But if it's done in devotion to the Lord, If my life, he said, they never give up. But it has to be done, it has to be turned around. Instead of just doing dana for some glorification, I'm doing dana to spread Krishna's message.
Okay, so you're saying that it's not the thing, it's the way.
Yes.
Okay, we have Ramananda Krishna says related to Shrama Evahi Kevalam. They help us, and how are they going to help us if they don't please the Lord, Radhika? Narada Rishi, Prahlad saying, this is not going to please the Lord. And then we're doing them to please the Lord? Help me out here. I think Aja has a really good start on this.
So we stay clean for the pleasure of the Lord. We take vows to serve the Lord. We do charity to, again, expand Krishna consciousness. We fast on Ekadasi, again, for the pleasure of the Lord. We offer sacrifices, we offer things for the pleasure of the Lord. So all of these things, when done towards the Lord, is in devotion.
I'm still confused, Prabhu. So if I said to you, I don't like this type of food, like I just don't like it, and it's not going to please me. Or if someone told you that, if someone said, if you cook that thing for Urmila, it won't please her, it's actually laughable, and you cook it and you say you're cooking it for it to please me. Sorry, you're right, but I want you to dig a little deeper.
So sacrifices, I am giving up stuff what I have. I am offering stuff to the Lord. Basically, I am giving it up for the pleasure of the Lord so that I can please Krishna. So everything that I do, all of these 5 things that I do, Krishna has to be the center of it. The purpose of doing these has to be pleasure.
Okay, I think you're really close. Surita Gaur Prabhu, love to hear from you. Yes.
Hare Krishna Mataji. Just carrying on from the example you given, the food will not please you, but it will satisfy your hunger. So similarly, doing all these things will not please the Lord, but it will cleanse our heart. It will clean our mind so that we develop more devotion and we can develop more this what is mentioned here, unflinching, unalloyed devotion. So it will purify our consciousness, all these things.
Now, Prasant, you got it? You've got it here. Yes. It's just doing them alone. Asi, Prabhu.
Mataji, my understanding is that basically these things are done in the mode of goodness. So until someone moves through this path of goodness, this is a natural route. I'll not say the only route, but this is a natural route that once you're moving through the path of goodness, so you become a little more apt and get purified for performing devotional service. So this is a conducive environment for performing devotional service to please the Lord.
Are you okay if I challenge that? Will you be okay? Are you sure? Are you sure?
I think this is what would basically meant by be in the mode of goodness. That mode of goodness is a platform.
I've got a huge mace to smash that, but only if I have your permission. Do I have your
Yes,
permission?
you have.
Are you sure?
My head is right there before you.
Okay. You can do those in any of the modes. There's worship in sattva, worship in rajas, worship in tamas. There's charity in sattva, charity in rajas, charity in tamas. Each of those that Prahlad Maharaj mentioned can be done in any of the gunas, and therefore, in and of themselves, I don't think you can say that they're in sattva. A lot of people are giving answers like this, that we're doing those things to purify us and prepare us for devotion. I think Aj is a little closer to it, but Asti Prabhu, I think you're saying the same thing, which is a valuable thing, that we want to be prepared for devotion. But if we are, and we're going to do those things, we better make sure we're going to do them in sattva, because they're not automatically sattva. A vow is not automatically sattva. We had, what was his name? Vrikasura, who took this vow to cut off pieces of his flesh and throw them in the fire. That was not sattva. Advaita Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Bhakti is not dependent on any of these that are mentioned. And if someone is trying to achieve then and then move on to bhakti, it doesn't work. But if someone is trying to do bhakti, no matter in whatever mode, and this happens to be what you call byproducts quality that comes in the path of bhakti, then it's okay. But if someone is pursuing them and hoping that from there on they will step on to bhakti, it doesn't work. Bhakti is fully independent.
Okay, you're really saying something that's kind of the opposite of what we've been hearing from a lot of the people here, that it's a preliminary purification. And so you're saying that, no, it's not like that. And I tend to go, I mean, they're both right, because Krishna does talk about in the Gita that you can do things preparatory for bhakti if you're not yet ready for bhakti. At the same time, that's not really what we're advised. I like what Nilamani is saying here in the chat. If they're done in a standalone manner or for some other purpose, they will not please the Lord. But if they are done within the context of bhakti, then they can please the Lord. And this is similar to what someone else had written about, that Prahlad is saying this with a Prahlad is saying this with a qualifier. Okay, Prasant, you're saying between doing all these things for show versus not doing them at all, it does seem that without full devotion to the Lord is better. Well, again, it depends on the gunas, Prasant Prabhu. So if I'm doing these things in Tamagun, I don't think they're much use at all. You know, people in Tamagun do take vows. I swear I'm going to kill my enemy. You know, they do. All right, let's take a vow that we're going to rob this store together. You know, it's so doing that in Tamagun is not really going to be better than not doing them. I think the question is more what Asi Prabhu brought up: better to be in Sattvagun than to be in Rajagun, and better to be in Rajagun than to be in Tamagun if you're not going to be in Bhakti. Definitely. We would definitely prefer that human society be in Rajagun than in Tamagun. Absolutely. Definitely. And we would prefer that human society be in Sattvagun than in Rajagun. But ultimately, that's all meaningless if that's all that there is. It doesn't really have any ultimate meaning. Yes, if the things we're doing are a way to develop our love for Krishna and an expression of that love, if I give in charity, if I'm giving the Lord's prasad in charity because I love the Lord and because I want to love the Lord, and if I'm worshiping the Lord because I want to learn to love the Lord and because I already love the Lord, if I'm taking a vow because I want to love the Lord and as a way to show my love to the Lord, then it's certainly pleasing to him. So let's look at 52. How can we please the Lord? Let's go on from 50 to 51. Let's go on to 52. Prahlad saying those things in and of themselves are not going to please the Lord. How do we please the Lord?
By unflinching and unalloyed devotion to the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
Yes. Amala Bhaktya. That's it. I mean, let's think of this in context of a family. I think Prasant, you said the other day that it doesn't take much for your 3-year-old son to give you happiness. He doesn't have to do very much. You know, he's only 3, so some of this wouldn't be applicable. But if I'm thinking about, you know, because I see my granddaughter's family several times a week, almost every day. So they have a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. They're almost 5 and 7. So let's say the 6-year-old, you know, if he does well in school and he cleans up his mess before dinner and that kind of thing, but he's cold and unfeeling towards his parents and his brother, his parents aren't going to be pleased with that alone. He's going to say, well, I cleaned up my toys. Well, I did well in school. You should be happy with that. Now even if he's negligent with those things, and being only 6, he sometimes is, his affection for his parents is in and of itself pleasing. Now, if he's affectionate to his parents, he'll also want to clean up his toys before dinner. But it's the affection that's the most pleasing to the parents. And this is true in any relationship. I mean, but you can't say, well, I have affection without demonstrating it. If some husband is just lying on the couch all day watching the sporting games on television, and his wife says, you haven't earned any money for the last month, and you haven't fixed the leaky pipe, and you haven't mowed the lawn, and he says, but I love you, dear. Just earning the money and fixing the leaking pipe and mowing the lawn isn't going to make his wife happy if he has no affection for her. But if he simply says, I have affection, but I'm not demonstrating it anyway, then that's not going to be pleasing. Example of Damodar Lila as for how we can actually love the Lord. All right, so Prahlad Maharaj also talks about detachment here, which was really a continuation from yesterday's verses. Can you think of I'd like everyone to do this. I'd like everyone to put in the chat to give me a list of as many things that you can think of the reasons for detachment or the impetuses for detachment, Prahlad's arguments in favor of detachment. Yes, Prasant, that is what I'm saying. Yeah, automatically, but also we're trained by Guru, Prasant. It may not be all automatic because we may be stupid. And Goloka Vasani, I'll answer you in a minute. So I'd like everyone to list in the chat some of the arguments, as many arguments as you can, that Prahlad Maharaj makes about detachment. Okay, good, Radhika. Good, Nardarishi, but I'm looking for impetuses for detachment. Okay, that's a good impetus for detachment. Okay, we could list that. But I'm looking kind of for more a negative impetus rather than a positive impetus. Prasant, yes, but I guess I'm looking more for negative influences. Yes, Sitarani, exactly, yes. Yes, Radhika, of course, you said that in previous verses. That wasn't in this section. And Goloka Vasani, I wrote an answer in the chat. You may have to scroll up to see it. Stuti Priya, yes. Prasant, yes, although that was from another set of verses. Sri Radhagovinda, yes, that's a positive. Goloka Vasani, yes, excellent. Prasant, yes. Yes, excellent. Opposite result was from another set of verses. Excellent, Ekanta. Prayer Manjari, it may have been a typo, but I know you don't have English as your first language. You may want to look at the difference between haven and heaven. Excellent, excellent. Prema Manjari. Yes, okay, but why Ramananda Krishna? Very nice. Please, I'd like everybody to do that. Okay, nice, Mahalakshmi. I'd like you to look specifically at what Prahlad says in this section. Yes, Asit. That's true, Sri Radha Govinda, although that's in a different part of the Bhagavatam. There is that statement in the Bhagavatam, but it's not here. All right. I just want to, the last thing that I want to ask, and then we'll probably have time for, well, no, we won't have time for anything. Sorry, Mahalakshmi. The point that Prahlad Maharaj makes about that just like we care for ourselves, yes, okay, good. That just like we care for ourselves, we should care for the Lord. You know, this point is made in every tradition in the world that we should care for others the way we care for ourselves, that we should treat others the way we want to be treated. It's called the Golden Rule. It's in every culture, every society, every religion. And here Prahlad is saying that we should take care of the Lord like we take care of ourselves. Your thoughts about that? What are the implications of that instruction? Prema Manjari, I'd like to hear from you on this.
Which verse do you refer to?
I gotta find the verse, huh? Okay, give me a sec. 53. I'll give you the quote. Here, I can put the quote in the chat. In the same favorable way that one sees himself and takes care of himself, take the devotional service to satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is present everywhere as the super soul of all living entities. What are your thoughts about that? And kind of there are some interesting implications about this instruction from Prahlad.
Okay, so my thoughts about this are, like, generally in a bodily concept of life, one is mostly concerned with oneself and with one's own pleasure and happiness. So everything revolves around this. So I understand this instruction from Prahlad that one should actually give up the bodily conception of life, and instead of identifying with one's body, one should identify with the Supreme Lord as being part and parcel of Him. So the pleasure of the Lord and the happiness of the Lord is my pleasure and my happiness. So I will get my pleasure and my happiness if I can please Him. And when He is satisfied, then I will be satisfied.
That's very deep. That's very, very deep. Murali Prabhu, what's your thoughts about that statement of Prahlad Maharaj? What are the implications of that? You're just kind of, I'd like to get like kind of your reaction to that.
It is he's explaining about that is a favorable base to reach Him. And
Okay. Okay, Prasad Prabhu, you wrote about taking care of our body. I'd like you all, don't answer this, just think about this. So many of us have an altar in our home and deities in our home. Do we take care of our deities to the same level that we take care of our body? I'm not asking you to reply. I just want you to think about it. That's all, just to think about it. Are we taking care of the Lord with the same regularity and attention and devotion that we're taking care of our own body? Okay, let's see who else I'd like to. Mahalakshmi, you had a question. So what was your question? Yes, Ekanta, very important. Very, very important point. Yes. There's an implication here that we do take care of ourselves and that it's normal to take care of ourselves and it's normal to love ourselves. If I'm hating myself and criticizing myself and say, well, love the Lord the way you love yourself, then I guess I'm going to hate and criticize him too. So that's also there. Mahalakshmi, you said you had a question, I think, on 55? Yes, Ramadan Krishna, very nice.
54.
54, what was your question?
Well, it's something that caught my attention because quite often, ladies in Krishna consciousness feel disturbed by what Prabhupada says about unintelligent women. But here, in this verse, it is being mentioned not only demons and intelligent women, sudras, birds, lower animals, but it is included cowherd men. And Krishna was a cowherd man. So
Yes.
does it say?
So I'm glad you picked up on that. I was hoping some people would pick up on that. Villagers. So even if you're just a villager, it doesn't matter. You know, in other words, you don't have to be some sort of sophisticated person
To revive Krishna consciousness.
to become Krishna conscious. Prabhupada will often say things like that. Prabhupada will often say, you know, the residents of Vrindavan, they weren't well educated. You know, he'll talk about the gopis like that. He said they weren't well educated, they weren't sophisticated, they were simple village women, you know, but they were the best devotees. So very nice. Very, very nice. Okay, thank you very much. And tomorrow, something very exciting is going to happen. Hold on to your hats, everybody, for tomorrow's class. When this Leela comes to a very dramatic climax. So any mistakes I've made here, please excuse me and ignore them. Anything good here is from Srila Prabhupada, Prahlad Maharaj, Narada Muni, Sukadeva Goswami, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, and certainly not from me. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.